now the trouble you've started?
Be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human beings. Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well, now you got it.
Right, you tell them I'm coming, and hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio.
Mini Ice Age Conversations podcast. It's about observing cycles, sharing insights, and solving problems together by combining historical, climate, food, and economic data so you can make informed decisions as we shift into a new era. Here's what was, this is what's coming. Our world is never going back to 2019, so what will the new era look like? And most importantly, what is immediate that will affect the pocketbook and the outlook into next year so we can all get ready? Thank you for joining. I'm your host, David DuByne. And I do welcome you this evening, this morning, afternoon, wherever you are on this beautiful blue planet and those above in our skies. Thanks for joining as well as you zip around the planet through the atmosphere. Speaking of which, atmospheres, Kazakhstan, record cold, 50, 60 degrees Fahrenheit below the normal rate over the wheat crop there. Also, winter wheat devastated. Atmospheric river, mini. California, also another vegetable, nut, and food basket of the planet, specifically for America. And Ransom, I was really laughing at the Oxford breakout, if you will, the escape from Oxford before it gets locked. Climate initiatives, and I'll also talk about climate initiatives tonight with the Tennessee Valley Authority. Had a chance to talk to their PR person over there. Super interesting, really smart, and filled me in on some of what we can expect as we move toward 2030 and beyond, as the United Nations frameworks will grapple with the average citizen of any country across the planet, where global goals come above anybody in individuality and nation states themselves. It's going to be an interesting world. So Ransom, thank you for joining us tonight. Now, if anybody's out there listening, you can go over to libertylinks.io. I'll say that again, libertylinks, links.io/solar minimum. And that is every place we're streaming tonight live. We have 10 different locations. Just jump in there and all the links are super pretty easy. Just click the one you love and then go right there, because we're going to add some graphics and images tonight as we go along through the evening. I've been looking at old maps from the Cherokee because there's a village and we're looking for a couple caves around in a valley where a cave is the stream itself, and then when it gets too much water, it backs up. But a couple old maps that I found down in the museum show that there was a village around there. So delving into some ancient history, doing a walkabout into the old Cherokee village areas. And Ransom, thanks for joining. I know the world seems as it's the awareness of all the food price rises is hitting too. I just think we're hitting this sort of discombobulated juggernaut of static noise right now, and everybody feels something's different. So I don't know on your end if you're feeling it too. It just feels like something's in the air.
For sure. I think it is in the air, and it's the same thing that's been in the air for the last couple of years. I've been looking a lot at all of these admissions, studies, datas that are coming out about our recent medical extravaganza that we had in the last couple of years, I guess you want to call it. And it seems that, I don't know how to say it bluntly, I'm sure you're listening to some of the same people I'm listening to as well. What it looks like is something went around the world. We know what that something was, and it literally affected every single human being that it came across, whether or not they felt it or not, or they had a problem with it or not. It still happened. And those that decided to take medication for that medical extravaganza are having 10 times the same problem. So it's looking like really no one in the world can escape what has happened. Like the genie out of the bottle, they just keep popping. It's like they had a whole warehouse of genies and they keep popping them out of the bottle. And I think what's going to happen next is going to, and I don't want to sound like a pessimist or nothing, but I'm just reading the signs. And what I see is we're about to be totally turned off. And what I mean by that is, like, I've been talking about how they're taking away travel, power, or energy, I should say, taking away travel, energy, food, everything out of the human domain that allows us to have this civilization that we've been living in. And I kind of want to take you to Klaus Schwab here, and I'm going to show everybody the video. It's just kind of playing in the background. And this is the plan. And I'll show you some evidence in the headlines or indications that is exactly what's going to happen. What it is, it's a video of Klaus Schwab talking about how our recent medical extravaganza, I'm going to call it again, isn't going to hold a candle to what's about to happen to our power supply. And what he's talking about is transportation, hospital services, society as a whole, all coming to a collapse. And obviously, they are planning this. He's saying that the recent medical thing that went around the world in the last couple of years is going to be a small disturbance compared to this cyber attack that we're going to have. It's inevitable, according to them, right? So, I like to take these guys at their word. Like when they hold a event 201 and they start talking about what ifs, could be's, mights, and maybes. It's weird how all of those what ifs, mights, and maybes just seem to happen right afterwards. Like, and I wanted to get into another thing and hear some of your thoughts on it. So, as you probably know, the entire flight services and everything from the FAA was shut down yesterday due to a computer glitch. Now, we're just talking about Klaus Schwab and his kind of fantasy about the entire world going into turmoil from this big event of a cyber attack or several cyber attacks. And then you look at, some of the headlines going around, all U.S. domestic flights grounded after a software glitch. Now, they're saying that's just a glitch. That's not nobody attacking it. And then they're setting up all of these, 15-minute cities everywhere. I sent you a link there. That was kind of funny. People are kind of vandalizing their Great Reset in the way that they were destroying the little blockades that keep them in their neighborhoods. So they just ignore it, roll over it, destroy it, whatever. But then in the background, we're seeing all these chemical plants burn, food plants burn, infrastructure as a whole from one end to the other is just, falling apart. We have media blackouts over terror incidents like at the Vegas power plant, things like that. They don't even talk about it. You have other things going around the world. So you got all these things going on at the same time. South Korea president says, they could develop nuclear weapons. I mean, why not? And when they use these words like could, it makes me think of a lot of coulds, mights, and maybes we've been talking about the border. And I don't know if you realize that when I was talking about the events last week in Culiacan, I think it's called Culiacan, where they arrested El Chapo's son, and the cartel kind of started shooting at airliners and on the ground and in the sky, and there was all kinds of weird stuff going on, like It looked like a caravan of police, like when a cop dies, except for it was Cartel, and they were going out and doing stuff. And I was talking about how I believed that not only has it already been happening, but it's going to be one of the next steps with the global elite. Is they are going to make a kinetic war along the U.S.-Mexico border, and there's going to be all of these power outages and different things probably blamed on it. And then you got these other things in the background. My theory on this, what I was saying is, I don't know if you noticed, but that night after I said that, there was like, I don't know what I think 50 cal, like miniguns spraying villages at night, something that you're used to seeing in Afghanistan or Iraq or something like that. And we're talking C-130s flying. There's the Mexican military is literally almost bombing neighborhoods. I mean, you can't call it bombing because they're big bullets coming in. But all kinds of stuff was going on that day. So there was a prison break of, like 17 cartel members out of the Juarez jail. All of this stuff's going on. And in the backdrop, you have the Mexican president celebrating 40 million Mexicans. That's just Mexicans that have migrated into the United States. And they're saying that's a great thing, and nothing against Mexicans. My woman is a Mexican. This has nothing to do with that. But that's just counting people from Mexico. So that's not counting people from Cuba. That's not counting people from Venezuela, Colombia, China, Iran. I mean, they're coming from everywhere. And then you see all of this stuff. And then the very next day, nothing. The news headlines are clear of it. So I saved some of the headlines that were going on that day and that night. So Sinaloa Cartel deploys child soldiers, something you also see in the Middle East and Africa and stuff like that. You had, the accounts of violence by the police that was all over everything. 29 killed in arrest operation. And then over here in Juarez, 20 people were killed. And I'm showing some video of what I was talking about. So this is just basically there is a war going on. It's already happening. And they're trying to ignore this. And what's funny is just when Biden came right next to us here in El Paso, the day before that, the Rio Grande Valley was full of thousands of migrants sitting, waiting to get into the border. On the day of and the day before the president came, the entire city of El Paso was cleaned out. The migrant centers were empty. The Rio Grande Valley, the Rio Grande itself was cleared out. They put up a big fence, and all of a sudden you've seen police, Mexican police and the National Guard and police from Texas on one side. So they had it completely cleared and locked down like a demilitarized zone. It was completely cleared. So the president comes, nothing to see here. The border's fine. It looks secure to me. And then, in the backdrop of all of these things going on, it just goes dead. And then, yesterday, to circle back around, I don't know if you went outside, but there were hundreds of planes flying all over the place here. And this was supposed to be the biggest shutdown of all flights in the United States, all domestic flights, the only time since 9/11. And, there's some other weird stuff like people finding these antenna arrays, solar-powered antenna arrays hidden all over in the forest. Nobody knows what they are. You have FBI raids of Chinese police stations in the United States. So there's all kinds of this stuff going on. And in the front, you get president. Oh, he left classified documents here, there, all over the place when he was vice president. No big deal, even though that they, made a big deal out of that before. And that'll be the new thing that they're going to throw all over the television is just Biden this, Biden that. I think they're done with them. They're going to throw them under the rug. And then you have them wanting to literally in the U.S., and this sounds like, they would never say stuff like this, but they want to ban your gas stove, right? So at the same time as the food's skyrocketing, don't worry about it because we're going to shut down the ways you cook it and stuff. And, I kind of wanted to bring that up. We're getting to where our governments are, and I mean governments like worldwide, are really turning against the civilian, just shutting them off. And I have a feeling that is because they know that there's going to be massive die-offs. And I kind of wanted to get into, I sent you a video of a discussion with Joe Rogan and one of his guests, and he had basically broken it down very well. And I kind of looked up some of the stuff he said, and I wanted to ask you, what would a shutdown at about 2024, 2025 look like if China closed up its borders and started having turmoil inside and just shut off all trade? What would happen to the United States if that happened? And, you know, if you watch that thing, they were talking about that just from different things that are going on in China, that they only probably have a decade left, and that they've lied about their population growth. So some really weird stuff's going on in China. They overestimated their population about 100 million on purpose for whatever reason. And I wonder if that's so they could, you know, cover up what's going on over there, which is things are falling apart because things are getting out of control. I'll just put it that way, because you can't say too much on some of the YouTube channels we're going on. But it has to do with people getting sick, not like the first time, but a little worse than that. And it seems like everybody's been primed, so to speak, for this type of DNA attack.
Yeah, I'll look at that, and you know, it does seem that there's an enormous amount of control because of the food crop losses coming inbound now. You know, just me doing the research on my report for the month, we're seeing an enormous amount of rainfall in the equator regions, and it seems that the Southern Oscillation, which is we have the North Atlantic Oscillation, but they also have the Antarctic Oscillation, the AA, or the Indian Ocean, or the Indian Dipole. There's Southern Oscillation. You know, there's different measurements that, you know, to measure cavitations in the atmosphere and pressure differences. Well, usually it spins in sort of a circular fashion, just like our polar vortex does. It does the same in Antarctica. But just recently, it seems to have started to make cavitation waves across the entire continent of Antarctica, where when it comes up and meets Australia, it looks like it's 5 arms of an octopus curled and just spinning in a clockwise motion. This is very rare, very unusual. So setting up these weather patterns. So Argentina is going to continue to downgrade their crop production forecasts. They were sitting at about 21 million for the original forecast. You have to realize, you know, we're talking less than a year ago, and now they're down around 11.5 to possibly 12 million tons. So they were off by 8 million tons at least on the production forecasts. Brazil in the north is extremely wet, extremely cool, especially Suriname up there. And Guyana, remember with Jim Jones, that whole area is really starting to cool and get wet. So, and also the political unrest in Brazil. Then we go down to Australia, which supposedly claims that they have all-time record wheat production, but magically none of their transportation systems are working to be able to export outbound. So I'm like, really? Did they really produce that much? Or are you just saying that they did, but you can't export it for some unbeknownst reason? Then we have the Ukraine going in, and I couldn't believe today I got the new USDA numbers for the planting in Ukraine. The estimates are 20 million tons coming out of Ukraine. At all-time record production, they were only at 32 million tons. So we're supposed to believe in a war that's intensifying, an enormous amount of infrastructure smashed to smithereens, craters in the fields, shrapnel, unexploded ordnance, fences down, you know, irrigation not functional, that they're only going to be down approximately a third or a quarter of their production at full maximum record production when everything was functioning smoothly with fertilizers. And we're supposed to believe that. But see, the Ukrainian agriculture minister came out and said they would plant maximum 20% of their entire field space. Then we got the California thing going on. And please remember the hurricane that wiped out citrus production in Florida just a couple months ago. The super freeze that came down and wiped out most wheat or whatever vegetative crop was in the fields from the Mississippi over in the southeast U.S. was frozen. That was a total loss. Farmers here are just reeling in it after all the damage has finally been assessed. So think about all those things I just mentioned to you. That's all happening right now at the exact same time. And the fertilizer shortages out of the EU are going to knock 40% of available fertilizer off and not available this year. They're just not producing it. There's no natural gas. Chemical plants are shuttered. And Europe is returning to the dark ages. Now, all that is happening as we speak. Now, you're going to tell me that with unreliable food production, we're supposed to keep society intact. So look at it in a wider view. So what Ransom was previewing for me as he was going through each point was more control over the citizens, more police state, more of the weaponry out there visibly for a psychological, whatever you would call it, effect, best word, I guess. You're seeing it in action. You see that they're willing to use it. Now they're starting to lock down. Where else are you seeing it used? Oh, Pakistan. They're in food riots, full-on blown food riots where people are battling the army in the street to get the wheat trucks in. And you got to realize that there's a full-blown catastrophe happening in Pakistan. And they're only down 4.5 million tons of wheat exports on the entire year. Put that in perspective. The entire country is in a full-blown chaotic phase. Street battles, police, looting, stealing, highway robbery, literally trucks with grain bags on them trying to go to a different destination are pulled over and robbed on the sides of the roads, Robin Hood style. All because they're only lacking 4.5 million tons. That's it. And it caused that much chaos so far. But see, they come in at a distribution pattern on the quarter in Pakistan. It's not like everything comes in at one time in the year. And I've even seen it where there's been monthly import distributions out for some of the grain staples and the staples. Well, it seems like it was disrupted in the delivery this time, and these 3 months, they didn't have enough food in there. And you see, that's the thing. It goes down so fast, fully functional, and then just because they didn't get their shipments in or whatever for the quarter, and the logistics stopped on that. That took less than a month to fire up into that, from fully stocked foods warehouses and storages into they only missed a little bit on the shipment, and now it's complete chaos. Now you're looking at Sri Lanka 2.0, and now it's happening in Egypt as well. And I need to confirm with a couple other countries exactly what's happening down in Argentina, what's happening down in Uruguay, what's happening over in Peru. It seems like there's an enormous amount of civil unrest happening in the Southern Hemisphere countries. And, keep in mind here, Brazil, major grain exporter as well. So if Brazil switched into sort of a civil unrest sort of era, the grains are going to be limited coming out of there. So wherever you look, you see it's coming down to now food, economy, inflation. The cost of living can't be sustained any longer. The social contract is completely smashed to smithereens. Humpty Dumpty's jealous because, he didn't break into so many pieces as the social contract has been. So you're going to watch, this is the year of the social contract break. The people are going to realize a couple of things. This chaos is continuing. The crime's going to continue to amplify. You're going to watch government respond. You're going to see armed guards in supermarkets, and you're going to lose your mind that we're in an occupied territory, basically, on this planet as we move through these next year. I'm not even going to say years, plural. It's like 2023. Can't tell me spending $8 on eggs, and that's only going to go up higher in price. I saw some turkey bacon. A 2-pound ground turkey was $20. These Jimmy Dean sausage / cakes, whatever you call them, flap cakes, something like this, $2 each out of the pack. There were only 8 of them in there, and it was $15.99. I mean, the price of the food is going to continue to go up to the point where citizens, they have no outlet anymore. Like the travel's gone. So for me, that was also really quirky to see all the airlines get grounded, or not all, but many in America at the same time. And just thinking, how quirky is that? That, we had the freeze, super freeze, and all the chaos at Christmas with travel. Now the computer systems aren't functioning. Power grids are getting rocked left, right, and center. And somehow the reduction in power, whatever form it takes, is matching the UN mandates of a 1.5% decrease off of distribution of fossil-driven or fossil thermal-derived power. It's kind of quirky how it seems that these are just randomized events that are happening. But if you look and combine them as a total and get a percentage, it seems to match the drop-off as what's planned to the 2030 agenda, what's planned to the 2050 net zero. We're being taken out on purpose. All of these random events are not random at all. They're a combined effect to reduce percentage-wise, step by step, following these UN mandates in the COP conferences to bring us into, or try to bring us into, this green world where there will never be enough minerals to ever do such a thing. And I think Ransom showed the chart a couple of shows back about, the rare earth minerals, some of them, like galenium, is going to take 9,000 years to mine enough galenium for us to produce the windmills, batteries, solar panels, et cetera, that we envision today, or I don't, but the psychopaths in Washington and globally, Klaus, shout out, is coming to fruition. There's just not enough rare earth minerals. Even the copper, to mine all the copper, and copper is really common. It would take up to 200 years to mine all the copper for what they envision to the transition just to 2050. For all the rollout of the green technologies. See, that doesn't make sense where your 30-year plan takes 200 years to mine the minerals to implement your 30-year plan. At the most basic, copper. So something doesn't sit right with that alone. Just doing like the most basic, scratch the surface of inputs required for that move over to green energies. I mean, even a kindergartner could see that 30 minus 200, something's wrong. It should be a 1-to-1 ratio there, shouldn't it? But as we march forward, and see, I'm still questioning here, so I'm hoping Ransom can help me answer the question. So all these things that we're seeing, is it really truly because they need us to go to net zero or reductions into Agenda 2030 or global governance to bring us off of fossil fuels? Or is it B? The cycle we're in, taking down food production globally, is going to continue into 2030, 2032, to the point that society couldn't be salvaged anyway. We could never grow enough food for 8 billion people. And that's truly the reason the chaos is here. Because if you reduced 50% of the world's population, there would be no food shortages, even at the minimal levels of a grand solar minimum. The supply chains would be functioning fine. The amount of available materials would be perfect. Now, if you're looking at a world with half, then that 200 years to mine the copper turns into 100 years. I don't know. There's a lot of variables here, and I'm wondering if one is using to mask the other. Because Ransom, you got to eat, man. Everybody eats, and without the food, people become ungovernable, is the best way to put it, I would think.
Right. It seems like a scam. Obviously, that if you know something takes a certain amount of time to get the resources, how much resources do they get in the amount of time that they have planned? So it's only a certain amount, and it's nowhere near the amount to run all of the world on electric cars and all of these other fairy tales. However, it might just be enough to run their robotics and their AI machine that they're building. You wouldn't need as much as they're talking about. You'd only need a portion of that to, only certain things will be run off of that. And it's almost like they're kind of telling us that it's not just a normal reset. And I'll tell you why. It's like they know that this is a big reset, and they're giving you little clues all the time in your face. And I'll put an example. I'm sure you know about the Hunger Dryas, and probably that there's a strong amount of evidence that says that was basically caused by incoming objects from 50K to about 11K years ago. So there's spots all over the place. You can Carolina Bays. There's one they discovered in Alaska that's about 40,000 years old. There's one in Arizona, et cetera, et cetera. We know that we were being bombarded from 50K to about 11K probably, or at least there was aftermath still happening the last 1,000 years there. But we're about positive that happened. And it just so happens, right, that there is a comet floating toward us that no one's seen since the Stone Age, or what they call the Stone Age. 50,000 year comet may be visible to the naked eye. I'm not saying that this one's going to hit the Earth, but if they did know that cycles were kind of, so to speak, set in stone, you might lead the horse with the carrot the wrong direction, or I don't know what's a good thing to say, a cute thing to say about that. But basically, it's just misdirection. But I do think that they do have a plan, and that plan involves the resources that they're going to dig up. It's just that they're not going to be sharing those resources with the world. It seems more like they have a plan of replacement. And not only, we're in a new phase of the replacement. And I kind of think that the replacement started probably about 2001, where several Western countries went in the Middle East and bombed North Africa and the Middle East, and et cetera, et cetera. And then it made us a situation where people, felt sorry for some of the people there because of the aftermath of those things. And they started to migrate in mass numbers up to the northern parts of Europe, and, and the same thing's happening over here. Now, it won't be that long along the border before you could legitimately say that people south of the border are running from a war zone, because there is one there. And they're not just fighting over drugs. They're fighting over avocados. They're fighting over who gets to distribute the food. So, we might be going right into that cycle. And I kind of wanted to ask you this, because I kind of led into it. What if the big event is nothing more than just the collapse of the world economics that they already have planned? Because it seems like in the backdrop, they're setting up a system. And here, let me also, I was going to show everybody the kind of stuff that I mean that they're putting in your face. I saw an article about in Saudi Arabia, they're going to build a 820-foot tall spacecraft building that looks like a spacecraft, right? Just out there in the middle of the desert. At the same time, Amazon is building a copy of the Tower of Babel, right? So when you know what those kind of represent, they represent stuff that they talked about in the Sumerian tales, or the Anunnaki stories, if you will, about building shims, about the people building shims, and then everybody getting reset after that. Because they reached an apex in technology, and it was time to put them back and separate them and confuse them and wipe them out. We're talking about, pre-Diluvian society, and then the aftermath of that. And it seems the aftermath of that was a long, slow, steady replacement of the system they had then. And this one seems to be in a technological nature, and this is what's going on. They're replacing everything in this reset, and when it comes back online, everything is going to be interconnected in AI, or you're not allowed to use it. And kind of like here, researchers deepfakes his voice, uses AI to demand refund from Wells Fargo. You can see all of the aspects of where that can go when the biometrics can be cheated. So your money's not safe. You're going to have a specific kind of digital currency that can't be taken out by biometrics or any of this. And then you also got Microsoft AI can build a robo clone of your voice in just 3 seconds. So this is all old technology, right? New York City's banning AI chatbots that write essays and answers prompts. I don't know why, because the presidents of the United States use AI to write their stories. World's first robot lawyer. If you got a robot lawyer and you as a, someone that's been detained, I don't know if you've noticed, but around the country, they've got this new style of governing or judicial thing where they don't even bring the alleged criminal into court. They just put them on a little TV screen, and the judge looks at the TV screen. So it's already dehumanized. And now we're going to have, robot lawyers. They're saying it's a great thing because, they'll know the law better than any human. Well, why not have a robot judge? And then we get into killer robots and the articles like this, which I don't believe actually, but according to them, The Hill, killer robots and AI's dirty little secret. Many people prefer robots over humans, right? So they're pumping this fake reality, and I think this is where it's going to be, is just a bunch of authoritarian intermediates to the elite. So you as a poor person are not even going to be able to talk to your governing body or the person that represents your feudalistic area, where you're trapped in these little 15-minute areas that they plan. And then that brings me back to what they're trying to tell you. Like, all of these elites are saying, you know what? The COVID was just the first stage. Don't worry about it. We're going to reset everything. We're going to turn off the lights worldwide. And then they do little test runs. Like, this is what was weird to me yesterday, is that according to the news outlets, all the U.S. domestic flights grounded after software glitch, right? The Federal Aviation Administration has reported failure of a crucial notice to air mission systems anyway, blah, blah, blah. But I go outside, I look up, and there's trails all over the place. There's flights going everywhere, at least where I'm at. But I think they were all coming from military bases, like Fort Bliss and other stuff. And then it just goes on and on about the everything's robots. Robo-eclipse, robots with human consciousness will eclipse humanity. See, they'll be better geniuses and they'll be better at humanity than we are, the humans. And then they're pushing, like, I don't know if you saw this, they released another UFO report that says really there's, all of these incidents of people seeing all of these new technologies, whether they're new because they're UFOs literally from another planet or they're UFOs built by governments. Either way, that's being unveiled. And they're just, what was it, a couple months ago? They just said, yeah, UFOs are real, but don't worry about it. And then, you can't worry about any of this stuff as a regular person. So a regular person can't sit around and literally, well, what's the price of tea in China, or what's a hill of beans worth? But you do know how much, like you're saying, $8 for a carton of eggs, which should be about $1, $1.30, $1.50. That's a reasonable price for eggs. So people can't worry about all this stuff. And meanwhile, they're watching the news, and the news is telling them worry about, classified documents from a president, a vice president. He's been keeping, stuff in his garage next to his car, where he lets his son, the crackhead, live, who's making deals with China and Ukraine. But don't worry about none of that stuff. You can't when eggs cost so much. And how is anybody supposed to, a regular person that's not like the people listening to our program, how are they supposed to connect all of these dots when they're bombarded with fear, potential wars, and then real wars, real, diseases at the same time as people are saying, don't worry about it. Others are saying, worry about it. You can see that everything is a bipolar, disease going on where the public just can't figure out which way to go. And I think there's just some simple solutions to that. And it's just turn it all off. Say no to everything. Say no to opt out of everything. When people start approaching you in public with some weird idea, you say, no, thanks. I don't think so. And move on. And we're going to have to start building communities that are out, and we've said this before, that are outside of the matrix, but more than that, just outside of the government. You're going to have to make friends, literally, because we'll get to it in a minute, but all of the food that is going to be coming out in the next decade is going to have the same medicine in it that a lot of people just took for the recent medical extravaganza that we had. It's going in everything: eggs, milk, beef, vegetables, you name it. They are changing it because everything is being turned off. So the only way out of it is to create small pockets of small pockets of barter. And you really, not to sound bad, but you're going to have to keep these things secret. You're going to have to keep your relationships with people that have beef and eggs and all of this other stuff secret, because you have the Karens of the world, the people of the that want to be the Matrix's mascot or the establishment's mascot, and that those people are going to be a real problem while you're trying to remove yourself. And I've been thinking, really, I'm planning everything from how to go to the bathroom to where we're going to get our water. And I wanted to bring this up. I've been studying a lot about the Olmec / Mayan civilization that lasted probably 3,000 years in a row, if you count, both of the cultures as one. Because really there's the Mayan culture and they don't really know who lived there before that. So they just kind of say Olmec, and they give the Mayans a lot of credit for people that lived there before. But the more I study this, the more I realized that there was massive industry. There was so much industry, so many buildings, so much riches in the Yucatan Peninsula that there were cities with massive amounts of middle class people. That means there weren't just elites and peasants at that time. There was a middle class. And something happened, and they really think they know what it is. And it's basically something as simple as the rain stopped coming for 30 years at a time, 5 years at a time. And the people just couldn't live there, even though they were in the middle of the jungle with the best fertile land anywhere. They couldn't sustain a population there on a simple problem if they just didn't have water. Now, you imagine all of these cities out in the Southwest that are dependent on runoff from the mountains. They're dependent on reservoirs. They're dependent on dams. They're dependent on electricity to get the water to them. And there is no other water sources that you could just go out and go get a drink or, put your filter in. Very few in the Southwest. So just like the Mayan people, anybody in the U.S., if things get turned off, like Klaus Schwab wants, turn off the power, turn off the water. If this happens 2 years at a time, 1 year at a time, periodically, you could just see that everything is set up for the massive migration of human beings across the planet. And when I look down in the Yucatan now, it seems like they're planning out cities, railways, and they're cutting down forests to make neighborhoods. I know what a neighborhood looks like, and they're tearing up the forest to make, and then they're underneath it, they're finding all of this civilization that was everywhere. So it already happened there. Civilization already lived there, and water just stopped. So back to the 50,000 years of the comet coming back, and it's the green comet. Weren't you saying something about a blue Kachina in the Times? And with all of this stuff mixed up, don't you think the elites know exactly when these things happen? In other words, they might know that there is a planetary bombardment. They may be hyping up the public to buy into this green movement and convert everything to electricity that comes from sources that are not actually renewable, things that fall apart, things that they can't promote, so that you waste all of your time for the next 10 years preparing for something that's not going to be a reality, but instead the reality is more of a nightmare. And meanwhile, they've accumulated all of these rare earth elements, the bigger players, the countries and governmental agencies. They'll acquire all that stuff. So they're going to still have it, and it's still going to be packed away in places. And when they come back out to start the new matrix after the reset, they will have every bit of everything that they need to start with a superior technological civilization than those people that have been hanging on through farming and through older techniques.
Yeah, I would agree. And then who is in control? Because you mentioned something interesting about the Younger Dryas era. Coming out of that era with supposed cometary impact, and that's what the Carolina base would have been formed from, is all that ice ejected off of the 2-mile thick ice sheet as a comet slammed into it. You get those 100, 200, 1,000 pound chunks of ice flying 200 or 300 miles through the air with some huge velocity and speed on that. Thunk, into the mud, and then it melts. And they're like, hey, these are all these perfect size holes with the same sort of vector triangulated on them on the angle of entry, but we never found any impactors. It was ice. So you have to wonder if the cycle comes. Now, I don't know if this green comet is going to be a real thing that's going to have a real physical impact, or is it going to be a psychological thing with a psychological impact? Because speaking of ancient history, anytime the Chinese would see a comet, that was a bad omen. They knew comet, tails, debris, whatever, had an effect on our planet terrestrially. That there would be famines, there would be plagues, these sort of things. And maybe they understood that the comet with its tail left some other bacterias or whatnot across the planet. But anytime comets came, they were not celebrated at all. Everybody was like biting their nails, going, "Oh, bad omen, oh, bad omen." But they keep pushing this one here to being a 50,000-year interval. What's so special about that? You know, I mean, there's all types of things. There's some that are millions of years old that come, and if there's things millions of years old in our solar system that are there and have been since space registry began, you know, and now they want to focus on a 50,000-year-old comet coming through. I did have a chance to look at it close up today from some different feeds like spaceweathernews.com or spaceweather.com, and there's a few other area places. I forget the one website, Ransom, you probably know, where you can track the comet, and it'll show you the highest, you know, luminescence. I think it's going to get down to a 4, which will be visible to the naked eye. There's one part of it's blue, one part of it's green. Remember Hale-Bopp back in the 1990s? Part of it was white, part of it was blue. Well, this one's going to be green on the bottom half and blue on the top half. So there was supposed to be another K2 Pan-STARRS that was supposedly on the solstice, December 21st, supposed to be visible to the human eye, naked eye, but it was visible in binoculars, but it never hit that brightness of interacting with the sun with an opposite charge. So for me, now here's something, you know, Electric Universe fans out there, if indeed this comet had gone out and discharged for 50,000 years and is coming back in, it should have quite the glow to it, because as it comes around perihelion, and I think it's the first week or so of February that this thing should be really getting close to Earth. I'm wondering if after it comes from perihelion, if it doesn't break up, if it will flare and become a supergiant blue-green dot in the sky, which would then, your blue star Caccina's in play. That only is valid if the coma were to expand with some sort of electrical interaction with our sun as it spun around and, you know, headed toward Earth here. Now, it's going to be quite some ways from us. Its tail's not going to brush us. It's way up there. But still, you know, these long duration timeline events, like the Younger Dryas, 12,000 some years ago, between, let's say, 12,500 years ago, that in itself, supposedly, this part that struck the ice sheet was part of a larger group. If you think Shoemaker-Levy that crashed into Jupiter, remember those 7 giant meteors hit into Jupiter and they, you know, could see it. It was a string of pearls. The way the larger comet broke up and there was those 9 trailing pieces. Well, what's super interesting, or 7, what's interesting is in Chinese legend, they have a guy called Ho Yi. And what he did was had to shoot arrows to knock the additional suns out of the sky, because there was at that time, again, 9 different suns, and it was starting to scorch the side of the Earth. But for me, in retrospect, looking at that legend, it was the same thing, like a Shoemaker-Levy breakup, where those trailing pieces all had comas and tails to them as well. And they had some sort of electromagnetic effect as well as physical effect, geophysical effect on the planet. Now, supposedly the Younger Dryas ice impact was a portion of one of those strings of pearls, but the other ones just kept on trucking. So I'm wondering if one of those pieces is the return of this here. Because you mentioned those ancient civilizations, even if we go back 12,500 years, they're saying this one's 50,000, plus or minus. But if you go 12,500 years times 4, you get right at that 50,000 year mark. So these grand solar minimums, also this 400-year cycle, when you couple 5 of those together, you get a longer duration, once in a 2,000-year intensity. So if we're looking at this 12,500-year cometary cycle, but then there's a larger, more powerful intertwined cycle of probably just much larger debris on a 50,000-year cycle. Are we into that? And if you were, and again, you know, Ransom mentioned it here, if the leaders that be of this planet and those in the interdimensional realms communicating with them, if they knew the cycle was really at that intensity, then there would really be nothing to salvage. Nothing. You would go underground with your tech, and you would pop back up later, or you would go off-world with your tech, with your anti-gravitics or anti-gravity craft, and then wait it out. Because with anti-gravity, it wouldn't matter if you have 50 tons of lead around you to block you from the cosmic rays and the different radiations. Wouldn't matter. It's weightless. I'll take 100 tons up. It's weightless. Doesn't matter. Weight doesn't even exist. It's 1 billion tons. No, it's not. It's weightless. So if you had that kind of tech, now, one thing that was interesting here is if you're talking about the reset of technologies, even at the Younger Dryas boundary era or prior to that, coming out of the Ice Age. Because you think about our weather patterns today. They're really stable, and we have over the last 200 years really wired in the planting and harvesting seasons. Like when you plant, when you harvest, what crop, what latitude globally. We wired that out last 200 years. So imagine if your climate had stabilized for 80,000 years in the Ice Age, or even 50,000 years. Like the plant harvest days would be wired out too, which species in which area, which latitude, but for 50,000 years, not 10,000 years in the era of warmth in the interglacial we have. So there would have been a very advanced society because they would have been stable for 40,000 years of technological growth. So Ransom, you hit me a little bit there when you said, who set them back and who had the tech 12,000 years ago? Okay, if it's at that point, then the tech they have is millions of years advanced or 100,000 years advanced of what we even have, and we think the DARPA things are 50 years advanced. That's maybe the whole PSYOP. Really, the controllers of tech that have been here, and if you're talking that far back with Younger Dryas time with the same tech, resetting and controlling civilization of tech back then, you can go, if you believe in some of the more ancient legends of like Lemuria or Atlantis, that sort of tech level. Something's way, 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 way more advanced than anything we see at this point. I mean, everything, even what we would consider like anti-gravity craft would be, like a paper airplane in comparison to 100,000-year-old tech. So who's controlling what civilization on what level and in which reset and which cycle, I guess, would be the best set of questions for you, Ransom.
Well, it is kind of trippy that they kind of marked this boundary about 50K years ago. And since then, periodically, we know that there's been bombardment happening. And then you kind of fast forward up to the Younger Dryas. What's weird about that date, 50,000 years, is that all of the ancient civilizations around the world were paying attention to the 26,000-year precession of the equinox. And the only way that they would know that was a complete cycle is if they had been, keeping track of it for 52,000 years, correct? I mean, you would have to know that it did this and it completed a cycle and came back around. So they had to have been keeping track of at least calendar time for 50,000 years. Plus, there's numerous calendars that they've discovered, different ones, keeping track of the astrology in the sky. There's paintings, all kinds of stuff that have recently been decoded, realizing that the number system on them is keeping track of exactly that, the astronomy or the precession of the equinox. But it's weird that something happened, I'm going to say 52,000 years ago or 26,000 years ago, you could say, but I'm saying 52,000 because that's the only way that I can, comprehend how they would know that the cycle of the precession of the equinox repeated. Is if they saw it happen and then saw it happen again. So something happened that made them want to keep track of time in the first place, creating calendar systems and these other things. I don't know why they would do that, but let's fast forward to the 12K point where we may or may not have a bunch of incoming objects, hitting across these glaciers and ice packs and, mile-high amounts of water across North America and maybe Europe. And a lot of the ocean too. So that would have put up all this ocean. But I remember, I don't know if it was 2 shows ago that you were talking about, this time it would be fire, not ice, because there is no glacier pack. There's no mile high, glaciers to hit. So if it hit now, it would be land, it would be ocean. But, like if it hit in Siberia, say, it would be nothing but massive forest fires, of pine forests that give us most of the oxygen we breathe. A lot of people are worried about the tropical rainforest, but actually most of the oxygen we breathe comes from the northern hemisphere and all of the pine forests that stretch around from the Americas through Europe and Russia. and come back. Can you imagine just what would happen if it hit on land? It would be something to speak of. And if they know that there's a cycle of incoming objects, however they know, they would know when that cycle was complete or when it was coming back. And I'm not saying there's a Nibiru, and I'm not saying that this 50K comet has anything to do with that. I just think it's ironic that something that wasn't here since the what we're calling the Stone Age 50,000 years ago is showing up again, which means that periodically, and by the way, they just discovered this, so they didn't even know it was coming, or at least that's what they tell the public. So maybe they did know it was, or they didn't know. But either way, just how I've seen you and many others just look at the patterns of the glacial and interglacial kind of bar graph there, and you could just see that there is a heartbeat of the sun going on, and that every so often this thing does that. Now we're at the end of this interglacial, right? So we're going into a glacial period, but we're not going to have enough water on the earth unless something hits the oceans, or something, or water comes from underneath the earth itself, or some kind of planetary bombardment that adds water that would have a flood. There's just nothing to flood. It already happened. The Great Deluge happened. All of that ice is now in the ocean, and there we are at the beginning of that cycle.
And we'll be right back after the break. David DuByne, Ransom, Godwin, right here, Many Ice Age Conversations. We're going to talk more about ancient history when we come back.
right. Thanks for listening while we take that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
And I welcome you back for the second hour of Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm your host, David DuByne, right here with Ransom, Godwin. If you appreciate free speech, please consider a donation to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. Keep it on air. Keep the production running. Takes a little bit of effort to keep these types of venues open so we can continue to have these discussions. I mean, now more than ever. When we look at what's happening and what is truly the history of what we know. You know, that's what we're really talking about on the break. And how does it affect what's happening today? You know, some of these issues, the deeper they get and the more in the face that it really starts to change the society, there's going to be more censorship of that type of information. You know, because, I mean, just look at the last 2 years. Almost everything that was discussed in the beginning by voices, which subsequently turned out to be true, 90% of it at least. Anytime there was a debate, it was suppressed. Anybody who was purveying that information was removed. So you just have to wonder what the next set of information that goes counter against the narrative will be removed first. Will it be something about the climate? Will it be something about the food shortages? Will it be something about the economy? All of which affect your families and your friends and yourself, all of it. So it's good we have these discussions intertwining because perhaps we can come at a solution then if we're all in this together. But that requires us to talk and listen. Freedom of speech. Revolution Radio, Studio A, Thursday night, 10 p.m. to midnight. Now, Ransom, I had something for you here. While I was on the break, I pulled up my Tartaria folder because I'm really in the belief that the history which we have been told is not the way it really unfolded. Because I notice routinely, if you go in and look for things like Tartaria, mud flood, this sort of stuff, exploration, explorers, trade routes, these are kind of some of the ancient trade route would be a better. You're going to find an enormous amount of maps that come with any of these searches. Now, a lot of people are searching for the buildings or remnants or, you know, a building buried up to 2 floors in what it appears to be sort of liquefaction or mud, something like this. I grab every map I can because I see this just doesn't make sense. It's so quirky that I was thinking about going that direction on the maps, and the first thing I pulled up in the first slide in the first image, I didn't have to go any further. This is a perfect example here. Now, the Drake Passage, if anybody has a map on your wall or if you're able to get to a search engine to pop up South America, and that area between South America and Antarctica is called the Drake Passage. Some people say that a dragon landed there from the heavens and then skidded, and you can still see its snout. And that's what caused the rip between the continents. It looks like really something hit there and bent the crust a little bit. Excuse me for that microphone tap. Was it Cometary? Was that the legend of a dragon coming in and it was really a comet that hit in the Southern Ocean? Because when I look at the map from 1570, it does show that the southern part of Chile and down south of Argentina connected to Antarctica. I mean, there was still a little channel between the two, but nothing like that super giant Drake Passage that we see that's, 400 miles wide. At the most, it looked like it was 50 miles wide or something. But nothing, this map looks very different than it did in what we see in today's world. And just think about it, that's only 1570. And then here it is. The subhead for the map is, it turned out that there was a catastrophe in the 16th century, but there's no record of a huge celestial body following out of the sky and destroying part of the continent. And then, you got to think that's in the Southern Ocean. So if something were to happen down there, would we notice it? If a comet had truly smashed into that, what we consider now the Drake Passage between South America and Antarctica, How many people would have noticed it, witnessed it, been able to record it? But think about this, the Younger Dryas, which we were talking about before the show break, the Younger Dryas impact, the reason we have so few large animals in North America compared to places like Africa is because it was on the other side of the planet on the opposite hemisphere, literally across the planet. So it didn't have the damage, so the big animals still survived that. Because you got to think those animals that were still running around at the end of the last glacial cycle, some 13,000 years ago, like that saber-toothed tigers and things, those aren't there anymore. They were all wiped out when that comet hit the ice sheet and then devastated the food supply, but also just the debris raining out and the instant temperature drops and the floods would be instantaneous. It was just cataclysm across North America and Canada, or I should say even now, yeah, Mexico, North America, and Canada, or America. I'm trying to think on a continental basis here, reading the countries on top there, because you got to think about, okay, so it hits on the ice sheet, rocks all of North America, and it would also be on the same latitude affecting over into Europe too. There would have been a mass die-off of all the big animals in Europe. But on the other side of the planet, down at the other bottom, that's Africa. So this thing here, Drake Passage, smashed by a comet, comes in, looks pretty massive if you look at the debris field on it. Would have made a massive tidal wave. Now, again, if there was a tidal wave with a meteor strike at that magnitude, would the tidal wave have gone completely around the ocean, all the way into the Pacific as well in a different direction? There's parts of the world that wouldn't have and they wouldn't have felt the real sea level rises. They wouldn't have felt the tsunami. They wouldn't have felt the shock wave. They wouldn't have heard the shock wave. They wouldn't have felt the temperature drop. Well, maybe after the cloud shrouding would have occurred. But think about that. Would there be somebody to report it? Does a comet smashing into the ocean, if nobody sees it, does it make a sound, Ransom, do you think?
I bet it was a really loud sound. The other day I was watching Diamond, and he was showing a paper that was about, how massive floods would have caused the continental shelves to break off, causing even more tsunamis, and like the tsunamis bouncing around inside the Atlantic, going back and forth probably multiple times. And you just think about what kind of massive tsunami would happen if a big chunk under the ocean of the continental shelf just broke off, kind of slid down in the middle. That would have pushed so much water around that tsunamis would have been bouncing off of continents back and forth, or at least that's what I gathered from the paper. So you could just imagine any of the impacts that they've shown that have happened, 40,000 to 12K. And think about it, we haven't had anything, that was damaging to that degree. And it kind of shows you that if there was a series of these impacts going on, several different times in Earth's history, and a recent patch there kind of ending in the Younger Dryas, what would that look like in today's modern world if something just smashed into any continent around the world? I mean, you take your pick. You could Africa, Australia, South America, North America. It doesn't really matter. Kind of like that Hunga Tunga thing, but on, a more massive scale. What would that do to like infrastructure? Everything would just totally shut down, and they wouldn't need any other excuses that they've kind of been peddling out. If something like that happened, you've already been distracted up to the point where it's too late. What are you actually going to do? And that's kind of why I brought up the Mayans, because we know that something happened in like the Guatemala area where people started moving up north to the Mexico portion of the Yucatan Peninsula. And when they got there, they went and dug up the forest at that time, and they found a bunch of old palaces and old buildings with finer cut stone. And then they built their stuff right on top of it, like sacred sites or whatever. But then something happened to them, and they just all disappear. And it's pretty obvious to a lot of people that are looking that the way that they collected water there, and this is just a minor thing, is why I keep bringing it up. Because this is something that could relate to us today in a matter of, just one day. If infrastructure turned off for whatever reason in a certain area for any portion of time, you essentially are just like the Mayans that were living there in the jungles. The rain didn't come, for 5 years now. So they had these massive stockpiles of water that they would dig into the hill, and then they would put plaster inside of it, and then they would gather all the rainwater they possibly could, and they would pour it into there, and they had little drainage systems that would go in there, and it would fill up like a reservoir, and that would keep them going through the whole 6 months of dry season. But something started happening, something, massively different on the earth. And this is recent times. This isn't even, we're not even talking Hunger Dryas. We're just talking, 1,500 years ago. Something happened that just changed the weather pattern completely in that area, where it stopped raining and they just could not live there, period. So if you live in any of these cities, you could pick a scenario: terrorist attack, cyber attack, pandemic, lockdowns, whatever it is, you still are put in the same position that they were back then. You have a choice of migrating somewhere, or you need to have the infrastructure built to withstand it. And, when you look at our modern society, I brought this up last week, our whole grid of power is falling apart. They have older style nuclear, power plants that should have been updated and upgraded to a newer system that is clean and probably isn't going to have any problems. But instead, they're still using like a bunch of 70s models or 60 models things. The infrastructure is still basically the same as it's been for a long time. Almost all of the dams around the world were not built to be there as long as they have been there. So those are all susceptible to collapsing and totally changing an area. So you could just take your pick, any one of these scenarios, including war, and you're in the same position as any number of civilizations that have come and gone in the past, simply due to not having water or food. Those are just the two main things. So, when we're sitting on here and we're talking about growing your own food and seed storage, it's kind of like an understatement, because these civilizations in the past, they disappeared, but obviously they didn't disappear totally. And somebody was smart enough to keep seeds. Somebody was smart enough to keep a calendar, and all of these different things. So there are going to be pockets, but I have a feeling that this time we are dumbed down more than at any other so-called reset for natural or artificial reasons. Any other reset in history, I don't think that they were as dumb as we are now, as far as their relationship with the earth and how to use the earth to survive, because we're designed to live off the earth, obviously. But I don't think anybody knows how to do that efficiently anymore, except for people that live off the earth still. Like, you can go to any number of places around the world where basically the day-to-day operations is what it's always been for humankind: is go out, get some water, get some food, get your supplies, and you survive another day. But we need to think about that bigger than just, daily. You need to think about, what are you going to do for a couple of years? And that's why I kind of connect it to this Mayan scenario of whatever happened about 800 AD. Is just everybody disappeared. They just left. They don't know why. Most likely, they have theories about war, but they don't find the war instruments at these cities they're uncovering in the Yucatan. There's not arrowheads. There's not, any evidence of a war. It seems more like they just got up and they left. And they left for something simple, like no water. And that equates to us in a way that it really hasn't for decades. We've got to a point where we're so codependent on the system. And I don't mean me and you particularly, but us as a civilization now. Without electricity and water, people start dying. We already know that. So when the power goes out in Chicago and it's 80 to 90 degrees for like 20 days straight, people start dying. So what happens if you add no water to that situation? Eggs that are $20 a carton, little borders in the city that say, well, you can't go to that part of town. You got to stay in your 15-minute zone. So even though the richer neighborhood may have the eggs, your neighborhood doesn't, and you're not allowed to go over there. And I was saying that last time, this whole 15-minute city thing seems like the epic end to civilization. So they're going to set everybody up in these little areas where they're not allowed to leave. And let me tell you, if it's 15 minutes to go to the doctor's, 15 minutes to go to the grocery store, it's 15 minutes to lock you down. It's 15 minutes to shut down civilization if they wanted to. And, if any kind of emergency, any kind of real emergency happens around the world, you can bet the bottom dollar is going to be that the elite, the government, and those who have are going to leave everyone else hanging. That means no one's coming to help. That means that you have to plan out everything, where you're going to poop, where you're going to eat, where you're going to get water. And I've been thinking about these things seriously. Just, from this thing that's happening across the border, it's not unforeseeable that an entire area could become destabilized to the point where you can't just travel. You can't just go somewhere and go get the water where you know where it's at. You have to have it on site where you're at, wherever you've decided to, I guess, make a stand, if you want to put it that way. You need to have water, and you need to have food, and you need to have an ability to trade with other people for things that you can't get, period. So we're going to have to go back to that society that they were living in, probably in the Younger Dryas, where people were moving around with their little caches of, tools, and they were following the animals and they were following the water. That might just have to be how human beings move forward. And since it's doubtful that we're going to be migrating all around, you're going to have to set up something locally. And at least we do have technology at this point to bring us into this era in a better situation than back then, at least if we collect knowledge and we collect seeds and we collect know-how. That's just the way it's got to be, so that you can sit there and not worry about what scenarios coming, because you've thought of them all. Other than a rock landing on your head from outer space, you can't do nothing about that. But these smaller scenarios like blizzards, hurricanes, tornadoes, power outages, the water system is messed up in your municipality, like all of those people in Flint, Michigan, they wouldn't have had a big deal if they had, another water source or some way to get water, but they were dependent on the government and charity to survive. I mean, and they weren't leaving, they weren't migrating or nothing. So that's the position that we're in. So then you stack on all of these things that they're throwing at us, the Great Reset, the possibility of financial systems collapsing. And, I was really listening to that guy talking about China having 10 years. If that's true, then that means the U.S. really only has 10 years, because we've become so interdependent on them that we would go down. It's like, mutually assured destruction. So it might be in the United States' best interest to prop China up for even longer.
Yeah, supply chain breakdowns. So even you're taking, we'll do two mind experiments here. Going to the extreme on having to be self-sufficient forever, basically, and start a society over, to what happens if just China stops its delivery of goods to America? Then what? If even just that one little tiny thing happened, in comparison, that would be a huge, never-ending disaster, because we've become so dependent on China for so many things, of even maintenance, repair operations, just things to even repair our basic society. Almost everything's made in China. Every repair part for lights and motors and, whatever it could possibly be, from tech to raw material, a lot of it comes from China. That would reset our civilization just in a, America's sense, or the Western homogeny, these five eyes. That would set us back, 20, 30 years, just because we couldn't get it to continue innovation or even repair to keep the lights on and the doors unlocked, But I'll tell you a story. You were speaking of Nibiru for a second. I had a chance to talk with Marshall Masters the other night, because he had seen my report on the cooling in the Southern Hemisphere, and he's like, "Ooh, we need to talk." And I said, okay. He was telling me about the siege of Leningrad in World War II. Because, he's also, whatever way you come in it, I don't care if you believe Nibiru's coming back, or if you believe there's going to be a magnetic coupling and volcanoes are going to go off VEI-8s and destroy food production, or you're going to need to do that, or whatever, a 12,000-year cycle is repeating. I don't care. The World Economic Forum is going to come 100%, and all 8 heads are going to eat you at the same time. Whatever conclusion you arrive at this point is, any excuse brings us back to the same thing. We all need to get more self-sufficient. I don't care what the cause. Anywhere you look across, narratives across the landscape of anything that you can think of right now, it points to, you better get a little more self-prepared on this thing, because many fascism forms, it seems like, Delivery of goods is going to stop or be greatly reduced, which means food supplies too. So Marshall Masters, we were talking about gold and silver during that time. Like, how much gold would you want to get? How much silver would you want to get? You know, we were talking about talking to others. If you had $1,000 and that's all you had to prepare, what would you do to try to, spread risks? Like buy $100 worth of nickels if you think the economy will collapse, or buy $100 worth of silver if you think there's going to be hyperinflation. Something like this. And then, what would you do with the other $900? Well, you maybe get a water filter. You're going to obviously get some storable food, some seeds, this sort of thing, garden tools at a estate sale. And the whole reason we were talking about preserving value of gold and silver in a breakdown or seeds or whatnot is he relayed this story to me that he heard relayed to him from a friend who directly had this happen, and it was relayed, and I was a third person down the line to hear it. So it goes a little like this. In the siege of Leningrad, and there's an enormous amount of information, Stalingrad and Leningrad, both of those cities got sieged. Now, most people would know the siege of Leningrad because that seems to be the most famous, but also the siege of Stalingrad occurred. And this is where they wrote books on exchanging recipes on how to boil your belt to make a soup to stave off the hunger pains during starvation. That was a traded recipe in Stalingrad during this time. And Leningrad, the horrors of the movies we've seen of that is kind of unthinkable to even be able to survive in the winter with no food like that, and the fighting and whoever survived that was traumatized for the rest of their life. There's no way you go through that and you just aren't like, you reverted back to base operating system at that point. All the refining and the niceties and the culturisms, etc., have been erased, and you're back down to the primal instinct again. So, Leningrad. The rationing came in, and people were given their ration cards. Well, this girl was a young girl, and she was like 10 or 11 years old during the siege of Leningrad, small girl at the time, and her job was when the Russians were giving away, when they did get supplies in the city and they were able to bake bread and get some sort of, let's say, rations to the people, you had to have a card to get it. And this girl, her job was just to do one thing. You bring a card in that says like one piece of bread, you take the little paper slip, and then you cut off one piece of bread and give it to them. That was her job. That's all she did. She just cut bread into slices and gave it to them on their ration card. But this is the story. She's a much older woman in her 80s. And then, again, this is a friend of Marshall's who said that, she talked about being in that situation. So he wanted to know more, because it's hard to find older people on the planet today that have lived through the Great Depression or been through like one of these wars or had something happen. And she got out a box. It was about the size of 2 cigar boxes. And she goes, "This is my secret box." And she had a nickname with the box, and I didn't write it down quickly enough, so I forgot it. But it was like her box of private memories that shattered her life, pretty much. And she opened it up, and it was full of diamond watches and diamond rings, gold rings, completely packed, chock-a-block. And she said that people would come in and put their gold ring or their wedding ring with the diamond in it on top of the piece of paper so they could get 2 slices of bread. 3 slices of bread. The larger the gold or silver on the thing to move across the counter, the extra piece of bread you got. So I'm thinking, holy smokes. Think about today's price of a gold band with a diamond in it. Like full 1 carat, full, like things you can't even find today, because, full 1 carat rings with gold for an extra slice or 2 of bread. And that's really what got into our discussion, was like, a lot of people think gold and silver is going to be it. It will be in the transition. It'll be a transitionary medium of exchange until the collapse. But once the collapse comes, Your gold and silver aren't going to do you much good when you come into the super famine or these food shortages, because after listening to that story, like people were trading their wedding rings for an extra slice of bread. That just shows you that the food will become the most important thing at that point. You know, and what the psyop might be right now is, oh yeah, government's controlling everything, or they're going to take over the planet, they're going to do this, you're going to do this 2030 agenda, you're going to do this. Ransom, perhaps you're right. Maybe that's the full deflection to think you and get you stuck looking into the future compared to that blue-green comet swinging by our planet in another couple weeks. Or the electromagnetic fields on the sun changing to the point where we're going to get the Cascadia range should start erupting in the next, I don't know, year to 2 years, or maybe even under. Just something like this. Food will be it at that point, and we'll have to start society and civilization completely over again, like the Amish do. Like you would become the Amish and then go from there and try to bring up and get electricity running again.
Maybe we could go over to these people at the Satan Con 2023. It's supposed to be the biggest satanic gathering ever. We could go over that. Maybe they have the answers, you know, or are they just another group of distracted people? But it does, it kind of circles around to like, you know, the ideas that they were pushing. That's what I was saying a minute ago. It's like they're kind of telling you what's going on, but not really. But they like to put it in your face. And I was showing them the picture of the new Amazon building. They literally, you know, designed it like the old artist renditions of the Tower of Babel. And then I was showing them the article about the thing in Saudi Arabia that they're going to be putting up that 820-foot spaceship building. And what they're doing right in your face, and you got to remember that at least the one in Saudi Arabia for sure, they like to do that. Like Saddam Hussein liked to refer to, you know, himself as being Nebuchadnezzar. They like to refer to the old, you know, stories and stuff. So whenever they're building a big spaceship building out there, it basically is the Shem talked about when they originally described the Tower of Babel. They used the word Shem in the Sumerian tale. It's a little bit different than the biblical tale, but the story is still there. And they get annoyed with us, and you know, they reset us. That's basically the story there. So no matter where you look in history, whether it be the Mayans or the Aztec or the Hopi, or, you know, like you can look everywhere. They talk about these worlds destroying and then new worlds coming and being destroyed in a different way. And, you know, kind of to bring that up about the comet, I wasn't suggesting that that one was going to hit us or nothing, but I did think it's ironic that all of a sudden they discover a new comet that hasn't been here since the Stone Age. And, you know, I guess they figured that out by the trajectory or whatever. But it does show you that either they're not sharing it or they don't know about it. And I'm thinking it's that they don't share it, because it seems to me that they always tell you the day after, hey, you know, this big asteroid flew by the Earth, closest ever. It almost killed us one night. You were sleeping, but don't worry about it. Price of eggs are $8. That's what you need to worry about. I'm not worried about a big rock coming, but I think that they have plans, you know, kind of in place, and you know, bringing it back to where we talk about predictive programming. How many of these movies have you seen where that is the scenario at the end? You know, like what they had, Armageddon, Deep Impact, etc. And then following that, there was a bunch of psyop programs, you know, like September, Elaine, I'm sure you remember, and you brought up Marshall Mathers. Is that his name, Marshall Mathers? That's right, right?
Oh, Masters, Marshall Masters.
I was confusing him with Eminem. Now, yeah, he's talked about a lot of stuff, and you know, a lot of people really do believe in this Nibiru idea. I'm not particularly one of them. I think it's possible, you know, but I think of it in this way: if there was a rogue planet that was going around, and it took 3,600 years, according to those Sumerian tales of the Anunnaki, that planet supposedly came from another solar system altogether. So if it came from another solar system, that would be what we call today as a rogue planet, getting spun out of its thing. And it would mean that it had probably an unstable orbit, if there was such a thing in Earth's Earth's rotation there, it would have been unstable. So I'm picturing, maybe by now there's just a planet out there full of Anunnaki frozen popsicles, like, because when you look at that story, it kind of just stops. It stops, where they stop talking about them, and it kind of morphs into other civilizations. But if you follow that story, at one time, some stayed on the planet, some stayed here, and then that kind of fizzles out in history. But if there was such a thing, and you were talking about like if it was an invasion, are we not being kind of invaded right now with this alien artificial intelligence style governing? And like I talk about this all the time, but it's so in your face now. We know the stock exchange is completely driven and controlled by AI. Nobody's paying attention to really what's going on there. The crypto market's basically AI. Movies are starting to be produced by AI. I'm sure some of you guys have seen them on Netflix and other things. So they have these machines, learning machines, that are writing stories for us. And they all seem to have a similar theme to them. And one of those themes is, like the Terminator scenario, where the robots become in charge. And when you listen to these people at the World Economic Forum, they're telling you exactly that. That's what they're telling you. They're giving you a new story like the Anunnaki tales, except for this time, they're the Anunnaki telling you, and they're telling you, well, we need to reset. We might have a global pandemic. We might, cyber attack everything till it shuts down. We might make some foods illegal, and then the foods that you still get, guess what? We're going to inject them with DNA changing technology. We'll put it that way so it don't hit the algorithm. And we're going to put that in your food, your vegetables, and we're going to pollute all your water with plasticides. And then on top of that, there's an AI singularity going on at the same exact time as they're introducing nano machines into the world's perception and showing you how they can use these in different ways. So now they got, they're bragging that they have a 3-in-1 medication you could take for all the respiratory things. Like if you didn't learn your lesson, they're trying to say that cancer's down 33%, which I think that's probably going to be backwards in the next couple of years. So they have everybody totally distracted with nonsensical things. Harry and the Prince, like when you go down the mainstream avenue, the only thing that they have to tell you is that you're bad. You need to change. You're killing the planet. And by the way, everything is going to be shut down because you won't do it yourself. You're selfish. You won't wear a mask. So guess what? We're going to do it for you. We're going to mandate the lockdowns. We're going to cut the food supply. You're not going to own anything. You're going to be happy. And matter of fact, here's you a Snickers bar it's made out of, cockroaches and mealworms and whatever. Why would any of us accept that lifestyle when it seems pretty obvious that with any small amount of money that you have, you could start saving seeds. You could start finding ways to save water, and you could start growing your food, at least to supplement. Maybe you can't, totally do it, but at least supplement some of these foods that are coming at you with these new technologies attached to them. And I'm watching Cartel there, and he's, if you watch his tweets on Twitter, he's really, I don't know how you say that, cryptic, I guess. But he's also right in your face, and he's pretty much telling people, whether you got the medication or you didn't, you were still touched by this biological weapon.
Yeah, how so? Can you describe that a little more?
Well, I'm not a doctor like him, but basically he's saying the mechanisms behind the artificial life form that people have acquired recently have some of the same mechanisms to damage the same organs, your cardiovascular system, your lungs, etc. And then if you were so lucky enough to take some medications once, twice, 3 times, the more it happens, the more likely you are to have all of these problems. And now the VIRS data's out. The different companies are now admitting that, well, we did have a patent for it. And, we were working on the program back in 2016, but don't worry about it. Just go along with that story they told you about the bats and the meat market, which by itself was an attack on natural foods. I mean, just the whole concept of scaring people all over the Eastern world there about their food being tainted with viruses. That was just an attack on it now. And I actually just recently saw a thing on Twitter that was like a little thing that was talking about how climate change is making your food that you grow at home unsafe, because with heat or cold, it might grow funguses or bacteria or viruses. So you got to be scared of nature and what happens in nature, but don't worry about it. You can eat our food that has viruses in it that we made. Tasty. And then the names they come up with, beyond belief there. It's all beyond belief. I'm sorry. The whole thing is funny. It's like a joke that they're just shoving in your face. And they know some of you get it. Some of you get the little signals that they're signaling, like the Tower of Babel and these other things that they just hand you right in your face while they make fun of you. That's what I think is going on, is that they are having a grand old time. I know a lot of the elites subscribe to ideas like Crowley and his age of Horus, where, the whole planet would have to be covered in blood so that the remaining people could do as thy wilt. And, so we're getting there.
Yeah, that's a bit spooky, this conference you're talking about. I mean, imagine the demons that'll be unleashed literally or brought into fruition there. Physical, that many people in the same physicality could, it literally change the reality or manifest something there through thought and ideals or chanting or resonance or whatever that would be, It's a possibility, which is crazy. And this whole control of the food, you're right, it comes down to it. The first thing is going to be controlling the masses after they understand there won't be enough food. Because that's okay. Maybe it's the first year it happens this year. Okay, it'll be new. People won't know how to understand it, like COVID. It spooked everybody in the beginning. It was all so unknown. People behaving differently, didn't exactly know what to do. And then after the second and now the third year, it became, that fear wore off. People are a little more, understanding of the possibilities of what could happen during time. So it's not as unknown. It's not as scary, as terrifying, petrifying as it was in the beginning. Well, the food shortages will be the same way. The first year that they understand that there's not enough food, and there won't be, you're going to watch society just lose its marbles. Okay, and then we'll understand it a little bit better. Now, what happens? Well, COVID, for the second year, it didn't keep intensifying. It kind of let off. So then people were sort of at that baseline on how to move through and exist in society. Okay? Now, what happens when the food shortages then don't let off and they continue to amplify and there's even more crops lost the next year? Because you'll pretty quickly understand that, let's say they lose, they'll probably eventually come out with a number by the end of 2023, like let's say 5% or 10%. And then you'll know that 10% has had that much of an effect on society, whether it be, civil unrest or, the number of guards in a supermarket or the inflation or the inavailability of products during a season or a year will be based on that 10% reduction of food globally. Okay, but then when we come around like year number 2, year number 3, year number 4, year number 5, as we move through this through 2031, 2032, it won't take but the second year before people realize that if they lose another 5% or 10%, and once they start to do the numbers on that, and they start to see the ramification, the real world effects from year number 1 of how much it upsets society, like year number 2, and then, okay, where we sit now, everything alleviated with the COVID, so people can take the breath again, like, it's kind of over. But what if you're going into year 3 of global food shortages? That's the difference in this one. Like, you have to think on the global scale of those who have been in power for thousands of years. Knowing that in the cycles, let's say, because some of these family lineages, and Ransom, you could speak way better to this than I, trace back to Babylonia and Sumeria, some 6,000 or 7,000 years prior, and it's the same families that have the direct lineage to the kings of Egypt, to the presidents of the United States. So these same entities that had started the systems that we still exist in today, at least the base forms of them, government, law, these sort of things, city design, etc., 7,000 years ago in Sumeria, are still in control today of the planet, or at least have a great influence on it. So after 7,000 years, you would probably at least know the multi-century cycles and a few of the multi-millennia cycles. Just saying at the beginning. So if you have 7,000 years of time, and through the last several hundred years with religion to go around and collect all of the data that had been collated for several thousand years across the rest of the planet and bring it into a single repository called the Vatican, 7,000 years of time is a good amount of time to understand at least the near-end 400-year cycles, 500-year cycles. Because you have to think about it, you get 14 of those 500-year cycles, right? 14 of those 500-year cycles, you would at least know what they were onsetting in a 7,000-year period. Now, if it's a 400-year cycle, then you're getting, quite a few more of those. Now, what if it's only a 100-year cycle? Or what if it's a once in a 2,000-year cycle? You would still see two of those, or actually three of those, my mistake, on a 7,000-year timeline. Three of those cycles come and go. And you would know the intermediary cycles of the shorter 400-year, 500-year, 200-year, whatever, 1,000-year blended in with that as the onset of the next big one, like the once in a 2,000-year cycle. So all that information I was searching about the grand solar minimum pointed to this grand solar minimum this time being one of the once in a 2,000-year cycle types of upsets of grand, in the grand scheme of things, they call it a grand solar minimum. It's really the least amount of solar activity in the last 2,000 years for the prolonged period of time to disrupt agriculture on the planet is kind of where we're heading. Because you got to think about the Maunder minimum. That was a good almost 2 solar cycles of zero solar activity in the 1640s and all the way to about 1700, had really deep effects on food production, global society and economy, etc. But what if we went into one where it was like 4 solar cycles with no food production? Now, in the whole grand scheme of things, that's only 50 years. If you're looking at 7,000 years of cycle and you're only thinking 50-year interval of incredibly low solar activity where the society can't grow enough food unless you're way down at the equator, and that's the only ones that would survive is equatorial. And, below 25 degrees south latitude, 25 degrees north latitude south to the equator and 25 degrees south latitude north up to the equator. So that band of 25 north and south all the way around the planet would be your sweet spot. Somebody knows these cycles are vast, and we're heading into another big one. Because I do believe, Ransom, you were saying something on the last set of comments there. Would people get locked down? Perhaps. Maybe it's a cycle too. It locks down. Okay, we come into the cycle. The food shortages are coming. The WF was started 16 cycles in addition prior before. We don't even know what really it would have been called in the 1600s or 1200 AD. The same set of people to reset a society. What about the, like 2,000 literally years ago at year 0? Birth of Christ, these reset cycles that are inbound. Perhaps the society does get locked down for a period of time, but just through natural, boom, it just breaks out and breaks open, and then people do go on the wander to try to, like you say, chase the game, chase the bountiful waters, this sort of thing. Think the Clovis people. We have right here in North America, the Clovis. Like, nobody wants to talk about that because that layer just does not fit in the time, space, technology, and known amount of people that had crossed the land bridge, quote unquote, in North America at the time. It throws out every single timeline that's ever been established as human movement around the planet. So I really think, I saw this one movie, this is the last thing I'm going to say here, Ransom. I saw this movie called Blindness. It was about something in the air and it blew, and everybody became blind. And, society stopped completely. And in the beginning, they were taking the people affected by this and putting them in like schools and hospitals, and they would put guards on the outside so nobody could get out. Well, one of the girls snuck in and she said, yeah, I'm blind, but she really could see. She was with her husband. But the whole world got covered in this, and then it was so locked down that anybody who had the disease or quote-unquote blindness disease was locked in. This thing guards everything. And then at some point it just hit where they're, even the guards got blinded, and this girl walked out and was like, hello, and there were no guards. Like, there were literally no guards, so you could just walk out. And that's what they did. They just all walked out. And then suddenly their sight came back, I forget how many years later, suddenly. But will it be something like this where there's, psychologically you think you might, and then one day you'll peer through the curtains and go, oh, there's no guards, let's go. Because something like this migration, I believe, is back in play again. I don't know, that was a good call on that one.
Yeah, I remember that movie. Do you remember they had to go to bartering? And there was some really despicable bartering going on because one group got the food and the other group didn't have the food, but they had women. Yeah, there was that was a crazy movie. But it kind of was like a depiction of kind of where we're at right now, right? Last couple of years, everybody decided to look to the authoritative sources for their information. And so basically that was like the blind leading the blind, as we now know that almost everything that they said was totally untrue. We're now, a couple of years in the future, we know that wasn't true. And there was also some other people that had power in that scenario. You remember some of the people were already blind and they knew how to read and they knew how to do Braille and all that stuff. They were like the king of the universe there because they were already used to that environment. And the same thing would happen right now. And here's a weird idea. Now, some people might get offended because, it's a little weird, but some people believe that for some reason or another, certain countries with a certain kind of demographic are being depopulated faster than others. In other words, the Western world, and like Australia and places like that, the Anglo-Saxon empire, so to speak, is the people with the reducing fertility rates, the reducing sperm rates. They're the countries that are getting replaced. You could call it that. They admit it themselves, some of the people with these plans. But there might be a weird reason for that. Now, let's think about this. You were talking a minute ago about, these royal families. They go back to God knows when. The pre-pharaonic Egyptians, the mummies, the blonde, blue-eyed people, they've, gene tested them, and the closest people on the earth to those families live in England, and England has a long history of back and forth with the royal bloodlines. It all goes back to George II. All of the modern countries, Spain, all of them, every one of them, the Netherlands, all of them, their royalty all came from George II. That's one of the more recent ones in like the 1600s that you could go look at and say, hey, look, everybody's related to him. But beyond that, these families in Spain and France and England and, the Germanic countries have gone around the world in an empire, and their populations have exploded. So in other words, you had a group of elites, kings, lords, earls, etc., and they went out to new lands and they claimed new lands and they populated them in a short span of a couple of hundred years. Those small populations have turned into millions, hundreds of millions of people. Now, what's weird about that is all of those people, these hundreds of million people, guess what? They can track their ancestry right back to royalty less than a couple hundred years ago. At least most people can. I can track mine back to King Canute, C-N-U-T. His son became the first Earl, or the first Godwin of the namesake, Earl of Godwin in 1001. So I can track my heritage right back to a royal family. But I'm not, special in any way. You could go look at the majority of people who live in Australia, a lot of people that live in England, Wales, Ireland, the Americas, all of these places that have been settled and the empire has taken over. They brought their genes with them. And now there are hundreds of millions of people with the same right to rule bloodline as these elites that claim that they're royal. So there may be something to the fact that if you were going to have a reset and a certain group of people thinks that they're entitled to rule by blood, they might want to get rid of the competition around the world that have just the same right. Or, I could claim the same right as they could of the bloodlines going back or whatever. They continually did that, of course. Up until this day, they still do it. You can't, all of their families are picked, and it's all a big organization. I mean, all the way to the Queen of England being like the 42nd granddaughter of the Prophet Muhammad. These chains of royalty rulers, you could go back to probably the times of just shamans and priests or wise men, whoever was in control. They've been in control, and they've continued to be in control. And in some of these ancient writings, they talk about the bloodlines being picked and for a reason and why and etc. But now you fast forward to the future, and we have hundreds of millions of people around the world that all can claim the right to rule, which is ironic because some of the new countries had this idea of independent rulers, of ruling thyself or being a free person under the creator. So that idea, when that genie came out of the bottle, you remember what they said, George Washington was the most dangerous man in the world because he didn't take kingship and instead said a person has these inalienable rights. He went along with that philosophy. And now they're trying to destroy all of these places that have the remnants of these ideas. And I think that, there may be a theory or a conspiracy of that theory, a real conspiracy, that they do want to get rid of certain bloodlines off the earth. And that's because they're competition to their bloodline. All of the same genetic markers reside in millions of people around the world that them. And if they're trying to claim their ancient ancestry, it doesn't mean anything if there's hundreds of millions of other people with the same right to rule claim. So if you were going to go into reset and the whole population of the world got reduced down, only certain families are going to come out of there with the tech, the gold, etc. And it seems like that's exactly what they're planning for. That's why you see the queen saying that she was going to abdicate her throne. But then all of a sudden now we got the other, the son becoming king. So no telling what they're going to do and run off with their state secret worth of gold. Or maybe the Anunnaki stories are legit and somebody's here to pick up rent. And that is the event that everybody's waiting on. I know a lot of people buy into that story, but I think there is some truth into it. Every culture on earth has always been fascinated with gold long before they had any use for it. It's purely a technological kind of element. You can't really do anything else besides look at it being pretty. So it is kind of weird that every single civilization on earth, all the way back to recorded history to where we started, they were all fascinated and trying to accumulate gold for the royal families who supposedly were left in charge. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's been the commodity of ages for sure. So you got to think about it. They call it God's money. I mean, everything else from our world is, a piece of paper produced by man, a coin stamped out somewhere, minted. But the gold, it's a wild mineral in the crust. You don't have to cultivate it. I mean, I am sure, though, that they have been, now with the technologies we have, transmuted different types of atoms into gold. Perhaps the scarcity of it, maybe they cannot replicate it, because the stories in Nibiru is, they come by because they need the gold to atomize it and put it in the atmosphere for some sort of magnetic field collapse that they have. But I was thinking, these Anunnaki are supposed to be all technologically advanced, etc. So can they not transmute elements through electricity or vibration or frequency? That I am trying to figure that out, because they say, these gold has been the tradable for, time immemorial. The Egyptians, Sumerians, I don't care how far back you go. Even if you go back way before that, still even 40, 50,000 years ago, they find, little carvings, or molds of gold. People have, molded gold because it's not so, it's pretty malleable. So they molded it into little statues or animal figurines, and gold has been used and molded since literally 50, 80,000 years ago. Even the Denisovans had gold associated in. But I'm still curious, like 118,000 years ago, 110,000 years ago, when, the last ice age interglacial occurred, that 10,000 years of warmth, why can't we find anything from that? Like, that's what I really want to see, is what kind of tech, what kind of jewelry was made, what kind of anything was prior at, 100,000 years ago in the warmth. So this gold has been time immemorial. So even if you go back 50,000 years, gold has been revered. So what is it? Is it beyond stories of the Anunnaki? And the Anunnaki are literally the middlemen to something else. Not sure. Big DuByne right here with Ransom Godwin. Thank you for joining us. This time is valuable. We'll see you next week. Hopefully information can help you get through another week. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Revolution